So Trump just floated the idea of annexing Greenland by force, if necessary. And if you think this is just another eccentric presidential whim, you're missing the bigger picture. Because what we're witnessing isn't just diplomatic theater. It's a stress test of the entire post-war international order, and the cracks are starting to show in ways that should concern anyone paying attention. According to a Reuters poll published this week, only 17% of Americans support acquiring Greenland, and a stunning 4% support doing so by force. Yet here we are, watching a sitting U.S. president openly discuss invading a NATO ally's territory while his party scrambles to rationalize the irrational. The question we should be asking is, how did we get to a point where the least popular foreign policy proposal in modern American history is being treated as serious policy? But let's slow down for a second. To understand what's actually happening here, we need context. Greenland isn't some unclaimed territory floating in the Arctic. It's an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, which has been a NATO member since the alliance's founding in 1949. That means Greenland falls under Article 5 protections, the collective defense clause that states an attack on one member is an attack on all. This is the same principle that has kept Europe stable for over 7 decades, the same mechanism that deterred Soviet expansion during the Cold War. When Trump threatens to take Greenland, whether they like it or not, he's not just threatening Denmark. He's threatening the foundational principle of the alliance that has underwritten Western security since 1949. Now, I know this might seem unusual, and you've probably already noticed. You're watching an AI avatar right now, but let me be clear. Every piece of analysis you're hearing, every connection we're making, every pattern we're identifying, that's human work, my work, with my research team. We use the avatar for consistent delivery, but the research, the skepticism, the dot connecting, that's all us. Just wanted to be transparent before we go deeper. The official justification being pushed is that this is about deterring China and Russia in the Arctic. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen went on television claiming that NATO has been concerned for 20 years about Chinese and Russian military exercises just off the coastal line of Greenland, and that Denmark needs to invest in air defense, or the US will have to do it themselves. There's just one problem with this narrative. It's completely fabricated. The chairman of Denmark's Defense Committee responded directly, asking Mullen to, "Please tell me more about these Chinese and Russian military exercises near Greenland. We haven't heard about that." In other words, the supposed threat justifying potential military action doesn't exist. This isn't a case of interpreting intelligence differently. This is inventing a threat from whole cloth. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Let's connect the dots on what's actually happening. 8 NATO allies, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the UK, just issued a joint statement expressing full solidarity with the Kingdom of Denmark and the people of Greenland. They called tariff threats against allies' actions that undermine transatlantic relations and risk a dangerous downward spiral. This is diplomatic language, but it's about as close as you get to allied nations publicly saying back off to the United States. These aren't just random countries. They represent the core of European NATO, our most important trading partners, and the foundation of the Western Alliance. The fact that they felt compelled to issue a joint statement at all tells you how serious the situation has become. And this is the crucial point. The very justification being used, protecting against Russian and Chinese aggression, is undermined by the action itself. Greenland is currently protected by NATO's Article 5. If Russia or China attempted to invade or establish military control, they would face the combined military response of 32 nations, including the United States. That's deterrence. But if the US were to annex Greenland through coercion or force, what happens to that deterrence model? If one NATO member can simply take territory from another, what does Article 5 mean? The system is designed to protect against external aggression, not internal predation. Let's look at the incentive structures here, because it's not that individuals are necessarily acting in bad faith. It's that the system rewards certain behaviors. For Republican senators like Mullen and Ted Cruz, the incentive is clear. Maintain good standing with Trump to avoid primary challenges and negative coverage in right-wing media. Cruz actually went on television praising Trump's America First focus, comparing Greenland acquisition to the Louisiana Purchase in Alaska. He said Greenland has massive rare earth minerals and critical minerals and is strategically located for missile defense. But here's what he's not saying. How does acquiring Greenland help ordinary Americans? Does it lower grocery prices, healthcare costs, energy bills? No. What it does is potentially cost billions in acquisition costs, require massive military and infrastructure investment in one of the most expensive operating environments on Earth, and alienate our closest trading partners. Which brings us to the economic dimension that's being completely ignored. The European Union is America's largest trading partner. We exported $368 billion in goods to the EU in 2023 alone. When you threaten to invade a European territory, there are consequences. We're already seeing them. Just days ago, Canada, responding to Trump's ongoing threats and tariff rhetoric, announced they're opening their market to Chinese electric vehicles at a 6.1% tariff rate, allowing up to 49,000 Chinese EVs into the Canadian market. The Canadian minister explicitly said they need to learn from, partner with, and access supply chains with China to build competitive EV sectors. That's a direct result of deteriorating relations with the United States, when Canada, our second largest trading partner, starts pivoting toward Chinese supply chains. That makes it harder for American manufacturers to compete in that market. And that's just one product category in one country. But there's a deeper layer here. This isn't happening in isolation. We've seen this pattern before when empires overextend and allies begin hedging their bets. During the Suez Crisis in 1956, when Britain and France invaded Egypt, the United States opposed the action, not out of moral principle alone, but because it threatened the stability of the international system America was trying to build. The result was a fundamental shift in how European powers viewed their relationship with the US. What we are witnessing now is the inverse. The United States acting in ways that force allies to question the reliability of American commitments. The mechanism here is straightforward but consequential. When you create uncertainty about whether the US will respect sovereignty and treaty obligations, allies don't just wait to see what happens. They start building alternative arrangements. That means diversifying supply chains away from American dependence, strengthening EU-only defense cooperation, exploring separate trade agreements with China and other powers. Each individual decision makes rational sense from a risk management perspective, but collectively, they erode American influence and economic leverage. It's a feedback loop. Aggressive US rhetoric creates allied concern. Allies hedge by building alternatives. American relative power declines, which can then trigger more aggressive rhetoric to compensate. And here's what most people miss. Russia and China don't need to do anything to benefit from this. They're not cheering because they think Trump will actually hand them Greenland. They're cheering because the US is doing their work for them, fracturing NATO, alienating allies, undermining the rules-based international order that has constrained their ambitions for decades. As the statement from European allies noted, this creates a dangerous downward spiral. When the US acts like territorial conquest is back on the menu, it gives other powers justification for their own territorial ambitions. If America can threaten to take Greenland, why can't Russia take more of Ukraine? Why can't China take Taiwan? So what does this actually mean in practice? In the immediate term, we're watching a real-time test of whether NATO can survive American unreliability. The joint statement from 8 allies is unprecedented in its directness, but words are just words. The real question is what happens if Trump continues down this path? Do European nations start accelerating their own defense integration independent of US leadership? Do they begin coordinating economic responses, tariffs, investment restrictions, regulatory barriers, to push back? According to defense analysts tracking European policy, there's already been a significant uptick in discussions about strategic autonomy, Europe's ability to defend itself without American guarantees. That's a direct response to perceived US unreliability. In the medium term, this could reshape global trade patterns in fundamental ways. The EU has significant economic leverage. It's an $18 trillion economy with 450 million consumers. If European nations decide to use that leverage to signal that threatening allies has consequences, American companies could face new regulatory scrutiny. American products could face new barriers. American digital platforms could face stricter enforcement. We saw hints of this with GDPR and digital services taxes that disproportionately affected US tech companies. That was about data privacy and tax fairness. Imagine what happens when it's about fundamental security relationships. But the deeper question is what this means for the international system itself. Since 1945, the US has been the primary guarantor of a rules-based order. Don't invade your neighbors, respect sovereignty, resolve disputes through institutions rather than force. That system hasn't been perfect. The US has violated its own rules repeatedly, but it established a framework that generally discouraged great power territorial conquest. When the most powerful nation in that system openly discusses annexing allied territory, what happens to the framework? If territorial revision is back on the table, we're returning to 19th century great power politics, where might makes right. And alliances shift based purely on power calculations, rather than shared values. There are a few ways this could play out. If Trump's rhetoric remains just rhetoric, bluster without action, allies may decide to wait out his administration, maintaining relationships while quietly building insurance policies. That's the optimistic scenario, but it still results in diminished American influence and accelerated European strategic autonomy. If Trump actually follows through with concrete coercive measures, serious tariffs on Denmark, military posturing, economic pressure, then we're in uncharted territory. European nations would face a choice: capitulate to American pressure, which would effectively end NATO as a mutual defense alliance, or push back collectively, which would mean an open economic and diplomatic conflict between the US and Europe. Neither outcome serves American interests. What we don't know yet is how far congressional Republicans are willing to go in enabling this. Right now, we're seeing them scramble to rationalize it, inventing threats, making historical analogies, claiming it's about America first. But if push comes to shove, if Trump actually tries to implement coercive measures against a NATO ally, do they have the courage to serve as a check on executive power? The incentive structure suggests no. Primary voters punish disloyalty to Trump far more than general election voters reward it. But institutional pressures can sometimes overcome political incentives when the stakes are high enough. So here's what we're really looking at. At its core, this isn't about Greenland. It's about whether the United States remains committed to the international system it created, or whether we're entering an era where American power is exercised without regard to allies, treaties, or long-term strategic interests. What this teaches us is that systems based on trust and shared commitments are fragile. They can be damaged much faster than they can be built. The post-war order took decades to construct and has provided immense benefits to American prosperity and security. But it turns out you can undermine it in a matter of weeks with enough reckless rhetoric and threat of unilateral action. The critical factor will be whether European nations can maintain unity in their response. If they stay coordinated, they have significant leverage. If they fracture, some accommodating American pressure while others resist, then the US can pick them off individually, and NATO effectively becomes a protection racket rather than a mutual alliance. Keep an eye on whether Germany and France, the EU's economic engines, start accelerating defense cooperation initiatives that don't include the US. Watch whether trade negotiations begin explicitly excluding American participation. Those will be the indicators that we've crossed a threshold. The stakes here are the entire architecture of the Western Alliance and the international economic system that has enabled unprecedented prosperity for 3/4 of a century. This is complicated, and anyone who tells you there's a simple solution either does not understand the dynamics at play or is trying to sell you something. What we're watching is a fundamental stress test, and the outcome will shape geopolitics for decades. The question isn't whether Trump's Greenland gambit will succeed. It won't. The question is how much damage gets done to American credibility, allied trust, and institutional stability in the process. Keep your eyes open. This matters more than most people realize.